Hello, welcome back to Ride Rescue. You see I'm playing Pigpen's father, the Peanuts from the Peanuts cartoons. Today I'm going to get back onto the Pontiac and a little sneak peek over my shoulder. Going to get this all finalized in primer, and as you can see, I'm actually going to put some color on this car. In fact, I just finished up putting some color on the car, and I'll let you go ahead and watch the video and I'll show you how I got to this point. As you can see, I went ahead and finished the door ding area. I just put a skim coat on that, and the same thing with the rear quarter panel. I went ahead and put a skim coat on it, sanded it down. Had a little bit of a low spot there where that scrape was and the rust weld area is. So I put another light coat on it and sanded it down until you can see there's some metal areas as well as some filler areas. So got it good and flat. It was a pretty good crease right here. It had a fairly deep low spot right here, so luckily I was able to get in from the behind and push that out as much as I could. And this side of the car I have complete now. I've scuffed everything down, wiped it down, and got it ready for primer. So both sides are now ready for primer. And before I prime, I want to get this door ready. And I stripped it all down, took all the mechanisms out of it, took the glass out, and I had a feeling there was some filler in it. You can see right along this area there's some cracks. My first thought was, well, it's just got heavy paint, but no, that's got some filler in it. The filler is cracking and failing, so I'm going to have to dig all that out. Hopefully it's not very deep, but for the fact that it's cracking, it probably is fairly thick filler. It has a light scuff all the way down the side of it. It doesn't fill enough there that I'll need to pull it or ding it out. I can get to the back side of it a little bit, so once I get it all sanded down, if it's heavy, it is right here a little bit. I'll definitely need some filler right there. This lip is a little bit wavy, so I'll have to straighten up that lip. Start sanding all this paint off. I bought some 80 grit sandpaper from Harbor Freight. It goes dull pretty fast, but it's super cheap, so I'll burn through a lot of it. After running the sander over it for a while, I got down to this area, and it's not as bad as I thought. It had some light cracks, mostly in the primer and the paint. The filler, as I get down deeper, is very solid. So I'm just going to leave that rather than grinding it all the way out. And then I can just do a skim coat on top of it because it's not wavy or anything. It's just had a light scrape. Pretty much the same thing that I've got all along here, just a light scrape. And I'll scuff this up a little bit heavier with some heavier grit sandpaper, and I'll do a light coat there and a light coat here, and then I've got a couple little dings on the top here. But this old paint is amazing. I'm sure it's a lacquer paint, and this red oxide primer, man, that has got a great coat of paint on there that really stuck well, and it didn't crack. There's only one area right along the top here where there was some surface rust, where there was a little bit of cracking and pitting, so I had to go all the way down to the bare metal to get down to the surface rust there. But the rest of this paint is good enough. I won't need to completely strip it off. surface rust all in this channel where that trim was on it. The best way to get that out is with a wire brush. I mixed up some filler, spread it on with my wide putty knife. Got one good, fairly thin coat, nothing too heavy, nothing too light, but it was a pretty light dent. So once this sets up, I'll get out my longboard and we'll sand it. Just before it's set up hard, I like to take a piece of sandpaper on a small block and just knock the tops off, kind of rough it up. It's still somewhat soft, so it's a little bit sticky on the surface. And by using some older I took the last sheet off of this that was used. I just break it up, and then if it does get any sticky in it, I don't feel bad because it was used sandpaper. Once I've knocked all the tops off, then I'll get out my fresh sandpaper. On a big, long, flat panel like this, I just think it's a must to have a long board, sanding board, and then just keep working it crisscross. You can see, once you get the initial sticky off, it cuts down pretty quick. We just got a little bit more sanding along here to do, and this is done, and I'll work on this area. Well, that went great. It was just one thin coat over both areas. And this is very flat, very smooth. Excited. Got way better than I thought it would. I was a little worried about this door. It had such horrible paint on it, but underneath the top coat, real good solid paint, good solid original primer. Filler, I ended up taking that filler mostly out. Original old filler. So. Sorry I didn't bore you with all the details of masking the whole car off. But I spent a full day getting everything masked off and covered. And then a few hours priming. See, I got all the primer on, and then I put on a guide coat. Did the same thing for the door. I didn't put guide coat around the inner jamb of the door. No need to. There was no damage, no filler. It was just a matter of cleaning it all up. So the outer area, there was a couple of long areas of filler in here. Luckily they're just thin. But put a good heavy coat of primer on it, primer surfacer, so that I can smooth it all out and get all the sand scratch out. Because I sanded it with some pretty heavy grit paper on all of the areas, and then gets a good bite for the primer surfacer. I didn't show this because the lighting was so poor, and with the primer you can see it, it's not as bad, but there was a big dent right here. Somebody had pried the trunk open when it was in the wrecking yard, and it was smashed in for a good 4 or 5 inches across. I wasn't sure if I could straighten it out. I had the trunk lid from the parts car. I really didn't want to use it because it had a lot of rust. But it ended up straightening out really well. I use my dent puller where you weld on the little studs and pull it out to pull this area out just above the keyway because you can't get to the back side of it. It came out really well. Only just a thin coat all across the back of it just to straighten it out. Had a few other dings. And then you can see I started sanding on this side just to make sure I had enough primer on it, enough surfacer to fill all the scratches. I go over the whole area first with 180 grit sandpaper, and then I'll go back with 320, and then I'll have to give it one more coat of primer. If everything goes as this is so far, I won't need to sand the primer. I'll just use a primer sealer that will seal it up. I'll use an epoxy type, flows real well, seals up all the little scratches, and it'll be ready for paint. In this area you can see how well the guide coat works, as well as filling the deep sand scratches. This had some pretty deep grind marks in the metal where the previous guy had done some work ages ago. I tried to smooth it out as much as I could, but once you get that initial guide coat out of the way, you can see how quickly it just smooths right out. So that the surfacer does its job, fills in those areas. The guide coat slowly goes away. Once the guide coat's gone, then you know it's smooth. And there we go. No telltale signs of high spots or low spots. I don't have any shiny metal showing through. I burned through the edges a little bit, but once the car is all masked off and ready for paint, just go over the whole area with a primer sealer just before paint. It doesn't have to be sanded, and the sealer will cover up all those bare metal areas. And as long as you don't use the heavy grit sandpaper to leave sanding scratches on those metal areas, there's no problem. I put the door back on and I got it adjusted fairly close. It's still just a little bit low. It's dragging a little bit much. You can hear it hit. It's hitting that strike plate. I need to lift it just a little bit more. I've got this gap on this side and the alignment perfect. The gap's a little wide here, but that's the way it was from the factory. That's the way it was at least when I got the car, and this is all the original paint, so nothing's ever been damaged here. The bottom gap is perfect all the way along, but right here in this, where this rounds together, it is super tight. And that's the way it was before. And when I got the car, it was dragging exactly like this. So I had adjusted it so that it fit better. I'll go back and I'll do that again. But I'm going to have to address this issue here. I don't like how tight that is. There's two ways of doing it. I can split this open, tap that whole edge back, and then re-weld it, or I can trim off the edge of the door. Trimming off the edge of the door is by far the easiest. It folds over and crimps, and then is spot welded. So if I just grind that off, it's going to open up those layers, and then I'll have to go back and weld it and grind it smooth, and then nobody will ever know it's been done. So I'll start by adjusting this hinge and getting this up so that it's not dragging. Riding just a little bit high, but once we get the door panel on the inside, get the handles and everything in there, it'll probably add just enough weight where I feel really comfortable with that. Gaps look much better here on top now too. It actually brought it back a little bit. The gap along the fender looks good, but it's just barely hitting right here at the bottom of the door. So I think it's going to be best to just grind that door back a little bit and then weld those pieces back together. So to start with, I'm just going to make a mark here along the edge on how much I want to trim off. So you can see now what I was talking about, how it opens up the edge of the door. So I'll just clamp that together tightly, and then I'll go down along that edge with my welder and weld that back together and grind it down smooth, paint that edge, and nobody will know it's ever been done. Once that dries and I get out my red paint to do the other door jamb, I'll just touch this area up. As you can see that this door jamb isn't in the best shape anyway, it needs to be repainted, but I'll just touch this area up just so it gives it all the same consistent color. Since I blocked this whole door down perfectly flat before I primed, I don't feel bad about just hand sanding it instead of blocking it again. As long as I don't keep using my fingertips to leave grooves, cross hatch with the palm of your hand to knock the guide coat off. Get down to where the scratches are, level the scratches out, and it will be perfectly level and smooth for a nice paint finish. I could use my DA on here and make it a lot faster, but I can't really get close to these edges and these contours with the DA. The DA would definitely leave some flat spots. For this flat area here, it'd be okay, but for these other contour areas, any equipment, I much prefer just using my hands and get a feel for it. There you go. You can see, knocks it down pretty easy, nice and smooth. I won't do anything more until I get on some gloves and a face mask, and then I'll finish this up. On this lip, if I was to just sand this by hand, I could leave high and low spots pretty easily because there's just not enough surface area there. So use a good flat piece, sanding block, and then you just finesse that down and be the sculptor again. I have an area right in here where it's kind of narrowed, so it leads me to believe there's a high spot here. So I'll have to be really careful and work that area. Hopefully I don't have to go back and refill. Looking good. You can see I did really good with not leaving any pinholes and a good coat of primer. There's one little pinhole right there that I'll need to fill. And then there's another little pinhole right here. But one thing that did show up that I didn't notice, there's a dent right there. So I will have to scuff that up and put a little bit of filler in that. So the guide coat did its job. Since I can't really paint as much as I want to here in the garage, as cold as it is and how much vapor and everything, overspray it gives off, there are a couple of areas that I want to go ahead and do that I can quickly do with a real low pressure, air pressure. The trunk lid lip, I'm going to go ahead and paint. I might even go ahead and paint this rocker and just kind of blend it in around this edge, depending on how much paint I actually have. You can see the dark gray that I have on here. Yesterday I went ahead and put on a epoxy primer sealer to really seal it all up, so that if I don't get this painted and it ends up going through the winter, it won't rust on any of the areas where I had sanded through that primer surfacer. So the sealer is a really good sealer. Like I said, it's an epoxy sealer. It seals up all the metal against any rust. It seals the porous paint and any areas where I might have sanded through to the filler. So it will protect it while it's sitting in the shop. And then you can see I did the same thing on this side where I put on the primer sealer. Same thing with the rocker. I've got it all sealed up. And then in order to get this door on, I'm going to go ahead and jam it. And you can see I've got the door hung up. I put the primer epoxy on the outside, but there's no real reason to do the inner side. So as you can see, I've got it hanging. I'm going to go ahead, I've got enough paint that I'm going to paint all around this area so that I can go ahead and put the door back together. Then I'll be able to put in the latch strike mechanism, all the window mechanism, the wing window, so that I can put the door on, and then I don't have to worry about masking off all around the hinges and trying to work around all that with the door on the car. And this area where the hinge goes is really difficult to get into to paint, so you pretty much have to paint this before the door is put onto the car. I have enough paint. If I'm not getting a lot of overspray and a lot of particles floating around in my garage, I might go ahead and just paint the whole door inside and out. So, got my fingers crossed. I know I have enough paint. It's just whether or not I can get a good enough coat on it to make it look good and not really mess up my garage or end up having problems with filtering it all out and getting it out of the room where I need to open the door and it's so cold I really don't want to open the garage door, but I have to. I need to wipe it down with wax and grease remover and make sure I didn't get any oils from my hands on it. This epoxy I put on about 12 hours ago. This epoxy primer sealer has about a 24-hour window where you can top coat it. So I've got plenty of time to mix up my paint and wipe everything down and tack rag it all off and get ready to actually put some color over these areas. So we'll see how it goes. So this is the paint that I bought for the car. That's what I used on the front fenders and some of the touch-ups that I've done. It's a single stage paint. You can put a catalyst in it. I'll have a urethane activator that I can mix into it, as well as the reducer to thin it down so I can do a really low pressure. I'll just use my little detail gun. That's what I use for the epoxy primer. It worked really well. I've got very little overspray and fumes in the garage because I'm able to direct it better. It doesn't have a really nice fan for the paint spray, but I think it'll be all right. I mean, it did great on the primer. I'll start with some surface wash. Normally you wouldn't be able to do a surface wash on just a regular primer when it's this fresh. You would leave streaks and actually rub some of it off, but with the epoxy, good solid cure. Well, that went way beyond what I expected. Luckily, it went very well. We had a little bit of a warming spell, just enough that I was able to keep the temperature high enough in the garage. I had just barely enough paint. So, I got it all done. I got the door painted, and the jamb painted. The finish is beautiful. I got the trunk lid done. I got both quarters finished. I even remembered to do the corner of the door. Pretty exciting. Now all we got to do is put it together. I'll let it cure for a week since it's not real warm in here. It's warm enough, but not warm enough to start putting it together within a few days. So we'll wait a week and I'll get all the trim back on and put the doors back together. I'll finish cleaning up here, cleaning up my paint supplies, putting my little paint gun and things away. I appreciate you watching, appreciate you tuning into my videos. If you like what I'm doing, please give me a thumbs up. Share with your friends. Get the word out of what I'm doing. I'm not exactly sure what my next project's going to be just yet, but I've got a pretty good idea of a car that will be showing up. I'm hoping it's my next project. Like I say, thanks again for watching, and stay tuned. Bye for now.